It is a prevailing misconception in the modern management of geriatric health that the skeletal system is a static, lifeless structure, akin to the steel beams of a skyscraper that simply rust or crack over time. Yet the reality of human physiology is far more dynamic, elegant, and complex. To truly understand how to restore bone density without relying on synthetic pharmaceuticals or calcium supplements that may do more harm than good, we must first fundamentally alter our perception of what bone actually is and how it functions within the aging body. The skeleton is a vibrant, living organ system, arguably one of the most metabolically active tissues in the human body, constantly in a state of flux known as remodeling, where old, brittle bone is dissolved and replaced by new, flexible tissue in a perpetual dance of cellular regeneration. This process is governed by a delicate interplay of hormones, enzymes, and nutrients that extends far beyond the simplistic notion that eating calcium leads to strong bones. For decades, the medical community and the pharmaceutical industry have propagated a reductionist view of osteoporosis and osteopenia, treating the skeleton as a simple calcium bank that requires massive deposits to remain solvent. Yet this approach has failed to curb the rising rates of hip fractures and fragility anomalies among the elderly population. We are currently facing a silent crisis where millions of seniors are consuming high doses of calcium carbonate or citrate, believing they are fortifying their frames, while in reality, they may be calcifying their arteries, increasing their risk of cardiovascular events, and doing very little to actually improve the tensile strength of their bones. The secret to bone restoration that many doctors are beginning to emphasize, and which we will explore in depth, lies not in the volume of calcium ingested, but in the biological context in which that calcium is presented to the body. To understand this, we must zoom in to the microscopic level of the bone matrix. Bone is not merely a block of calcium. It is a composite material, much like reinforced concrete, composed of a flexible collagen protein matrix which provides tensile strength and a mineral component, primarily hydroxyapatite, which provides compressive strength. In the aging process, the body does not just lose minerals. It loses the ability to maintain the collagen matrix that holds those minerals in place. And this is where the conventional calcium-first approach fails catastrophically. Imagine trying to plaster a wall that has no lath or mesh to hold the material. The plaster simply crumbles and falls away. And similarly, pouring calcium into a body that lacks the necessary enzymatic and hormonal signals to build the collagen matrix results in the mineral being excreted or, worse, deposited in soft tissues where it causes inflammation and sclerosis. The physiological mechanism of bone remodeling relies on two specific types of cells: osteoclasts, which are the demolition crew responsible for breaking down old bone tissue and releasing minerals into the bloodstream, and osteoblasts, the construction crew that lays down new bone matrix and mineralizes it. In a healthy, youthful body, the activity of these two cell types is perfectly coupled, ensuring that bone mass remains constant. However, as we age, a phenomenon known as uncoupling occurs, where the osteoclasts become more active than the osteoblasts, leading to a net loss of bone tissue, a process that is accelerated by chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and the decline of sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone. The crucial insight that is often overlooked in standard dietary advice is that the body strictly regulates calcium levels in the blood, not for the sake of the bones, but because calcium is an electrolyte essential for cardiac function and nerve transmission. The body will sacrifice the skeleton to maintain blood calcium levels within a very narrow, life-sustaining range. Therefore, when a senior citizen ingests a concentrated calcium supplement, usually derived from limestone or oyster shells, it creates a sudden, unnatural spike in blood calcium. This transient hypercalcemia triggers the body's protective mechanisms to rapidly reduce blood calcium levels to prevent heart arrhythmia. If the biological pathways that direct calcium into the bone, specifically the vitamin K2 and vitamin D3 dependent pathways, are not active, the body will frantically dump this excess calcium into the easiest available storage sites: the walls of the arteries, the kidneys, and the joints. This is the calcium paradox. a condition where a patient can simultaneously suffer from severe osteoporosis and severe atherosclerosis, or hardening of the arteries, essentially starving the bones of minerals while turning the blood vessels into stone. This explains why recent meta-analyses of clinical trials have shown a correlation between high-dose calcium supplementation and an increased risk of myocardial infarction. The strategy, therefore, must shift entirely from supplementation to modulation. We must stop flooding the system with raw materials it cannot process and start activating the cellular machinery that naturally demands and integrates calcium from dietary sources. The natural formula for bone restoration, as revealed by functional medicine and advanced nutritional science, begins with the understanding that bioavailability is king. Calcium found in nature, specifically in the plant and animal tissues we have evolved to eat, is never found in isolation. It is always bound to a complex matrix of proteins, carbohydrates, and other minerals like magnesium, phosphorus, boron, and strontium. This organic packaging is critical because it changes how the calcium is absorbed in the gut and how it is signaled in the blood. When we consume calcium from a natural source, such as sesame seeds, leafy greens, or bone broth, the mineral is released slowly during digestion, preventing the dangerous spike in blood levels and allowing the body's parathyroid hormone and calcitonin to regulate its distribution effectively. Furthermore, the acidity of the stomach plays a monumental role in this absorption process, a factor that is frequently compromised in the elderly. As we age, the parietal cells of the stomach produce less hydrochloric acid, a condition known as hypochlorhydria, which is often exacerbated by the prescription of proton pump inhibitors for acid reflux. Without sufficient stomach acid, the body cannot ionize minerals, meaning that even if a person eats a diet rich in calcium, they may absorb very little of it. The unabsorbed calcium then travels to the lower intestine, where it can bind with fats to form insoluble soaps, causing constipation or disrupt the gut microbiome, leading to systemic inflammation, which further stimulates the bone-destroying osteoclasts. Therefore, the first pillar of our natural formula involves restoring the chemical environment of the gut to ensure that the minerals we consume are actually bioavailable. This involves a paradigm shift from viewing bone health as a calcium deficiency to viewing it as a deficiency in energy and structural integrity. We must look at the bone as a reservoir of minerals that the body draws upon during times of metabolic acidosis. The modern Western diet, high in processed grains, sugars, and industrial seed oils, creates a low-grade chronic acidosis in the body. To buffer this acidity and maintain a neutral blood pH, the body is forced to leach alkaline minerals, primarily calcium and magnesium, from the bones. It is a biological act of desperation. Thus, before we even discuss specific foods, we must address the metabolic terrain. A diet that is alkalizing, not in the pseudoscientific sense of changing blood pH, but in the sense of providing a net surplus of mineral precursors and reducing the renal acid load, is essential. This leads us to the critical discussion of the role of magnesium and collagen. In the physiological theater of bone health, if calcium is the lead actor, magnesium is the director. Magnesium is required for the conversion of vitamin D into its active form, calcitriol, which in turn drives calcium absorption. Without sufficient magnesium, taking vitamin D is virtually useless. Moreover, magnesium stimulates the hormone calcitonin, which draws calcium out of the blood and soft tissues and puts it back into the bone, directly counteracting the effects of parathyroid hormone, which pulls calcium out. Surveys consistently show that a vast majority of the elderly population is deficient in magnesium due to soil depletion and the processing of foods, yet they are overloaded with calcium. This imbalance locks the cellular enzymes that are responsible for bone formation. The natural formula we are constructing prioritizes a calcium to magnesium ratio closer to 1:1, whereas most dairy products and supplements provide a ratio of 10:1 or higher. Furthermore, we must address the collagen connection. Bone is approximately 50% protein by volume. The tensile strength of bone, its ability to bend slightly without snapping, comes from collagen type I. As we age, our collagen production plummets, rendering bones brittle. A bone with high mineral density but low collagen quality is like a piece of chalk, hard but easily shattered. A bone with healthy collagen is like a bamboo stalk, incredibly tough and resilient. Therefore, the formula for natural bone restoration must include the amino acids glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline, which are the building blocks of collagen. These are rarely found in muscle meats like steak or chicken breast, but are abundant in the connective tissues, skin, and marrow of animals, parts that modern society has largely stopped eating. This dietary shift away from nose to tail eating is a significant anthropological factor in the prevalence of modern osteoporosis. Having established that the skeletal system is a dynamic, living tissue that demands a complex biological matrix rather than a simple mineral dump, we must now decode the specific nutritional formula that successfully mimics the body's internal requirements for regeneration. This brings us to the most critical, yet frequently ignored, component of the bone health equation: the nutrient that acts as the traffic cop for calcium in the bloodstream. For years, scientists were baffled by the calcium paradox, unable to explain why populations with the highest calcium intake often had the highest rates of osteoporosis and heart disease. The missing link, we now know, is vitamin K2, specifically in its negative 7-malonyl-CoA:s form. While vitamin D3 acts as the gatekeeper, opening the doors of the intestinal wall to allow calcium to enter the bloodstream, it is vitamin K2 that directs that calcium to its final destination. Without K2, calcium is like a delivery truck without a GPS. It drives aimlessly through the circulatory system and eventually parks in the wrong places, such as the coronary arteries or the valves of the heart. The mechanism by which vitamin K2 functions is nothing short of elegant biological engineering. It works by activating two specific proteins, osteocalcin and matrix GLA protein, MGP. Osteocalcin is secreted by osteoblasts, the bone-building cells we discussed earlier, but it is secreted in an inactive, carboxylate state. It requires vitamin K2 to undergo a chemical transformation, carboxylation, which essentially gives it claws to grab hold of calcium ions circulating in the blood and physically drag them into the bone matrix. Simultaneously, K2 activates MGP, which resides in the soft tissues and arteries. When activated, MGP repels calcium, preventing it from depositing in the vessel walls. Thus, vitamin K2 creates a powerful push-pull dynamic. It pushes calcium out of the arteries and pulls it into the bones. This is why the doctor's natural formula does not start with milk or cheese, but with fermentation. Vitamin K2 is bacterial in origin. In nature, it is found in the fermented soy product natto, certain hard cheeses like Gouda and Brie, and the fat of grass-fed animals. The modern sterilization of our food supply has virtually eliminated K2 from the diet, creating a widespread deficiency that renders calcium supplements dangerous. With the transport system optimized by vitamin K2 and vitamin D3, which we must source primarily from sunlight to generate the sulfated form that regulates the immune system, or from fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, we must turn our attention to the structural integrity of the bone itself, the rebar mentioned in our previous discussion. This brings us to the ancient culinary practice of bone broth, a cornerstone of the natural restoration formula. In the context of modern nutritional science, properly prepared bone broth is not merely a soup. It is a bioidentical liquid supplement. When the bones, knuckles, and connective tissues of animals are simmered for 24 to 48 hours in slightly acidic water, using vinegar or lemon juice to help extract minerals, the resulting liquid is saturated with bioavailable calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and silicon in the exact ratios found in animal skeletons, ratios that our own bodies recognize instantly. But even more importantly, this process extracts the gelatin and collagen peptides, specifically glycine, proline, and hydroxyproline. Glycine is an amino acid that serves as a fundamental precursor for the synthesis of DNA, RNA, and proteins, but also plays a vital role in dampening inflammation. Since osteoporosis is often driven by systemic inflammation, a state sometimes called inflammaging. The high glycine content of bone broth acts as a systemic anti-inflammatory agent, quieting the overactive osteoclasts. By consuming a cup of dense, gelatinous bone broth daily, a senior patient provides their body with pre-digested building blocks for the bone matrix, bypassing the need for heavy enzymatic breakdown, which aging digestive systems often struggle with. This is the matrix component of our formula, providing the sticky, flexible protein scaffolding that prevents bones from becoming brittle. Now, we must address the specific dietary sources of calcium that constitute the bricks of our formula. We must move beyond the simplistic dairy is best narrative. The crown jewel of plant-based calcium is the sesame seed, specifically unhulled black sesame seeds. In traditional Eastern medicine, black sesame has long been revered as a kidney and bone tonic. However, seeds contain anti-nutrients like phytic acid, which bind to minerals and prevent absorption. Therefore, the formula dictates that these seeds must be properly prepared, soaked, sprouted, or roasted and ground into a paste, tahini, to neutralize the phytates and unlock the mineral treasure within. Another powerhouse in this natural protocol is the group of small, oily fish consumed with their bones, such as sardines, anchovies, and smelt. This is arguably the most perfect bone food in existence because you are literally eating the bone of another creature. The calcium in fish bone is hydroxyapatite, the exact crystalline form found in human bone. Unlike calcium carbonate supplements, which are essentially chalk, the calcium from fish bones is organic and biological. Furthermore, these small fish are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA. Research has demonstrated that omega-3s inhibit the production of cytokines that promote bone resorption. By integrating canned sardines or fresh anchovies into the diet 2 to 3 times a week, one introduces a synergistic package of protein, calcium, vitamin D, and anti-inflammatory fats. We must also navigate the controversial topic of leafy greens. While kale, collard greens, and bok choy are touted as calcium superstars, the doctor's formula requires a discernment regarding oxalates. Oxalic acid is an organic compound found in many plants, such as spinach and Swiss chard, which binds avidly to calcium to form calcium oxalate crystals, the primary component of kidney stones. When you eat spinach, you may be ingesting a lot of calcium on paper, but you are absorbing very little of it. Therefore, for bone restoration, we favor low oxalate greens. The cruciferous family, kale, broccoli, bok choy, and cabbage, are superior choices because their calcium is highly bioavailable. To maximize this, the formula suggests cooking these greens with a healthy fat, such as grass-fed butter or coconut oil, and a splash of acid, like apple cider vinegar. Beyond the macronutrients, the natural formula also relies on trace minerals. Boron, for instance, is found in abundance in prunes, dried plums, raisins, and avocados. Clinical studies have surprisingly shown that the consumption of just 5 to 6 prunes a day can prevent bone loss in postmenopausal women. Silicon is another forgotten hero, essential for the formation of crosslinks between collagen strands, found in green beans, cucumbers, and the herb horsetail. We have now traversed the chemical landscape of bone health. Yet even the most perfect diet will fail to restore skeletal density if we ignore the fundamental laws of physics that govern human biology. The final, non-negotiable component of the doctor's natural formula is not something you swallow, but something you do. It is the application of mechanical stress to the skeletal frame, a principle scientifically enshrined as Wolff's Law, proposed by the German anatomist Julius Wolff. This law dictates that bone in a healthy person or animal will adapt to the loads under which it is placed. To stimulate new bone formation, the skeleton requires a novel, higher threshold stimulus, a force that literally bends the bone matrix on a microscopic level. This brings us to the fascinating concept of the piezoelectric effect. When a bone is compressed or subjected to impact, the collagen fibers inside the bone matrix slide against each other, generating a tiny, measurable electrical charge. This bioelectricity is the specific signal that wakes up the osteocytes, the sensory cells buried deep within the bone. When these cells detect that electrical charge, they send out chemical messengers to the osteoblasts, effectively saying, "We are under stress here. Send more minerals and reinforce this area immediately." Without this electrical signal, the raw materials we discussed simply float by in the bloodstream without being utilized. Therefore, the formula requires a prescription of osteogenic loading, such as the heel drop, which involves standing tall, rising up onto the toes, and then dropping back down onto the heels with a firm thud. That sudden deceleration sends a jolt of gravitational force up through the tibia, into the femur, and into the hip joint. Additionally, resistance training using bands or light weights is essential. Every time a muscle contracts forcefully, it pulls on the tendon, which pulls on the bone, creating that vital piezoelectric spark. However, there's a silent saboteur that can undermine all these nutritional and physical efforts: chronic stress and the hormone cortisol. In the modern physiological landscape, cortisol is the archenemy of bone density. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid released by the adrenal glands during times of fight or flight. It breaks down muscle and bone tissue to release amino acids and minerals into the bloodstream for quick fuel. It inhibits calcium absorption in the gut and increases calcium excretion in the kidneys. Furthermore, cortisol suppresses the production of sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone, both of which are anabolic agents for the skeleton. This links directly to the importance of sleep. Bone remodeling is rhythm-dependent. The majority of osteoblastic activity, bone building, occurs during deep, restorative sleep. If an individual suffers from insomnia, they miss the nightly construction shift. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, has been shown to have direct effects on bone cells, protecting them from oxidative stress and promoting differentiation. As we look to integrate all these elements into a cohesive lifestyle, the doctor's natural formula in practice looks like this. The day begins with hydration and sun exposure for vitamin D. Breakfast might consist of a yogurt bowl with ground sesame seeds and soaked prunes. The movement practice involves a brisk walk interspersed with heel drops or resistance band work. Lunch prioritizes low oxalate greens like bok choy paired with sardines. Dinner is the time for the matrix support, a soup or stew based on bone broth. This holistic approach represents a departure from the reductionist war on osteoporosis. It moves the locus of control from the prescription pad back to the kitchen and the gym. It empowers the elderly individual to understand that their diagnosis is not a sentence of inevitable decline. The power to rebuild is within us, waiting to be unlocked by the wisdom of nature and the discipline of habit.